Morning, everybody, or I should say good afternoon. So I know we've put you on auto mute for now, just to give you an idea of some of the format that we're going to be doing today. If you could put any questions that come up in the chat box, Jackie here is going to draw my attention to them as they come up. I wouldn't want you to miss an important question as you feel inspired to think it, but that will just help a bit for flow and keeping on track for our timing. First off, my name is Jennifer Sangster. I'm a senior operations consultant with CHOPS Consulting. CHOPS Consulting provides business analysis, operations expertise, supply chain, marketing strategy, and technology solutions for small, medium-sized business. My particular background is I am credentialed in supply chain management with a background in project management, business analysis, and trade and regulation compliance, specifically for consumer packaged goods and consumer manufactured goods. Our topic today, of course, is on tariffs. And now I'm extremely cognizant of the fact that the United States, Mexico, and Canada have decided to pause the tariff action to give important breathing room for negotiation. It is my expert opinion and counsel to everyone that you treat this as a grace period to continue to get ready to position your businesses to mitigate the risk of a tariff. So one of the first things I'd like to talk about is the tariff in general and to hopefully clear up some misconceptions about it. So it's important to understand that the US tariff targets the sale of Canadian-made goods in the United States, whereas the Canadian tariff targets US-made goods selling into Canada. So it's good to be cognizant of which direction each of these tariffs is pointing at. Now, that said, a lot of Canadian manufactured goods use US components, and a lot of US manufactured goods use Canadian components. So the impact for pricing can still be felt on both sides of the border, regardless of where the tariff is pointing. Now, aside from that, I want to also clarify that country of origin is the word of the day. Most tariffs are based on country of origin. Country of origin is not so much where it's coming from as where it was substantially made, further processed. You can Google different articles that are available online called Determination of Country of Origin for Marking Goods, and that is specifically supported by harmonized tariff systems and different custom systems around the world as far as implementing those tariffs. Now, how to explain this? Canada's had several trade bulletins since this came out Saturday evening that have clearly given indication that this tariff will be implemented based on country of origin. So that is goods made within Canada or substantially improved upon or altered upon being brought into Canada. The US has not had very many trade declarations out that have clarified how they are planning to implement their tariff. And I don't expect they're going to spend much time in the next 30 days clearing that up. So at this point, we can kind of turn ourselves to history and precedents. Most tariffs have been applied, including recent US steel tariffs, on the country of origin. A lot of the language in the publications specifically mentions Mexican origin goods and Canadian origin goods, which further leads me to think that it's going to be country origin based. Now, another way it could be implemented is country of export for the US tariff. It's not completely unprecedented, it's just unusual. That's more territory for embargoes and trade restrictions to put a country-wide ban or limitation on the exports coming from that country, regardless of country of origin. That's another reason why I think that it's going to be based on country of origin on both sides of the border for both tariffs as well as Mexico. That said, we will have to wait for them to actually put these things in play to know 100% for sure. There are ways for them to implement this as a US tariff either way, but the most common way has always been country of origin. And so that is where my advice is going to focus on today. Now, what businesses need to do moving forward? I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you to understand what the country of origin is for everything you do. Every component that you bring in, you need to know the country of origin. If you are bringing things in and performing the customs clearance, or you are having your broker do the customs clearance, You already know what the country of origin is for those goods from your past clearances. You can reach out to your broker, whether it's an actual brokerage company or perhaps through even FedEx or UPS, and you can ask them to provide you with a list of your past exports, which will include all the items that you previously brought in and what the country of origin is. That can help you understand if you have risk anywhere on the stuff that you're bringing in. And then I would recommend that you reach out to your suppliers and ask them, for this item that I'm getting that seems to be country of origin, United States, do you have any alternatives? Give them a chance to provide those alternatives. You don't want to turn your back on a supplier that you have a warm relationship with, just because the initial answer is no, it's just US. They are surely already working on this and already have options in mind. If they can't provide you with another option, now you have to go to the ground. You have to go to the ground and try and find another supplier that perhaps has a source that is not country of origin United States. Regardless of where you find a source, you need to ask them for a certificate of origin. That is the official customs documents used to declare a country of origin for goods. It's not enough for you just to be like, it's made in France and it doesn't apply to the tariff. Simply ask them for a country of origin certificate. You can even provide them the template if they're a small business. It's available online. You can just Google search it. There's tons of prompts on the backside of these documents and with different help forms on how to fill them out. Another thing that you should be aware of is if you are making Canadian goods or significantly enhancing them enough to make them country of origin Canada, and you are selling them to the United States, you need to be aware of what your country of origin is. You need to look up, again, that country of origin determination for marking for free trade. You need to know for each of your products, what is the country of origin? Because of the components involved and the countries those may be coming from, it is not a simple thing to just say that you're made in Canada. You may not actually meet the determination requirement to be country of origin Canada. You might be something else or one of the criteria. You really need to know which you are because the tariff may not apply to what you're selling. And now I know as a manufacturer in Canada, sometimes the goods we bring in and then we further process are not quite enough to be country of origin Canada. If that's the case and you don't really want to advertise that you're made in Canada but not quite made in Canada, I totally understand that. A great way to get around that in your marketing strategy while remaining completely accurate is to say that these products are free from tariffs or tariff-free goods. You don't have to advertise where they're coming from. You do have to provide a certificate of origin if someone requests it of you, but that can be done later at the time of sale. You don't have to put it in your marketing strategy if you don't want to call attention to it. Now, if you do have goods that are considered country of origin Canada, you want to advertise that right now. This is the time for marketing strategy. This is the time to consider what channels in Canada you may not have explored already. Do you have an e-commerce presence? It's easier than ever to get an e-commerce presence now. Do you exist on social media? If you're not on social media, I have to ask the question, do you exist at all? Nowadays, it is not so much about brick and mortar. There's so many ways to enhance new opportunities without having to go to completely new markets. A lot of conversation has been around why don't we have a free trade agreement with Europe? And I have a perfect example for you of why it's maybe not so simple. When we deal with the United States, we have one set of regulations for labeling depending on the product involved. If it's regulated, it might be regulated by the FDA. It's a large block of consumers to get access to with one set of standards. When you sell to Europe, you're still largely dealing with member state requirements on language, how the labels appear, different regulations on different kinds of products. You still end up losing your economies of scale because you have smaller member state populations that you're trying to sell to that still have their own individual rules. It's not quite as interchangeable as the United States, so we're always going to have to include the United States in our business plans. Now, I think this is a great opportunity to answer some questions.
I don't actually see any questions in the chat. So if anyone would perhaps like to unmute themselves, feel free to speak up, or you could drop your comments or feedback questions into the chat so we can all discuss further.
a quick question, Lindsay. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm curious if the tariff applies to non-physical products. Like I sell courses. I have a lot of students from the States. I sell photography, images and stuff like that on stock photography sites. Like, is that impacted by the tariff, do you think?
So at this point, it's like physical goods,
Physical
physical
goods only?
goods
Okay.
that have a harmonized tariff. Now, it's a little ambiguous on services like, could you put it on a commercial invoice? Could you assign it a harmonized tariff? I don't believe so. I honestly, even myself, but would be asking a customs broker. That's a good opportunity for you to bring up. Each company is going to be different. Each product is going to be different. If you have any confusion or concerns about whether your items are actually going to be affected by tariffs or not, or they're dutiable or taxable, the best thing to do is to start with an actual licensed customs broker. They're super helpful. They have tons of information. If you want a recommendation for one, I personally prefer Pacific Customs Brokers. I've also used Coast Customs Brokers. I just really like PCB because they're very proactive when it comes to bulletins and publications and education. Extremely thorough, very happy with them. Norman Jensen Customs Broker is another broker that's available on both sides of the border. They're so helpful. You can call them anytime. Just be like, does it apply? And they can point you to all the right resources. If you need to use a template, they're so fast to provide it. It's fantastic if it's not already on the site.
Awesome.
I should mention too, a lot of brokers that you work with probably have a billing portal where you might be able to access your country of origin information already. A lot of those billing portals support additional spots within their portal where you can download copies of your bills, copies of past customs documents, and then you can start building that understanding about what your country of origin risk is. I'd also like to recommend that even though we have this as a grace period, this is a really important thing to do for your business across the board. I feel like looking at the supply chain, tariffs are possibly a new thing that we're going to be dealing with multiple countries. I think it's really wise to know what your product's country of origin is for your components as well as where you're selling to, so that anytime there's news of a possible tariff, you can do a quick calculation of what your risk is. You really want to also look at your cost of goods. If you're selling something to the United States, that's a 25% hit on your margin. This is a really good time to get tight and lean and mean on your cost of goods and understanding what it is.
That was a great question. I'm just looking at another. Do we have any comments or tactics the businesses could be considering, like preloading inventory in the US over the next 30 days, or setting up subsidiaries and doing internal transfers, at transfer pricing to minimize the tariffs owed?
That's a great question.
This question came from the Langley Chamber of Commerce, I believe.
I think it would be an excellent strategy to try and preload your stock if you have that opportunity. It's not a long-term strategy. It's going to just buy you time. At some point, you're going to have to replenish that stock. And in the meantime, you do have carrying costs for those things in the United States. You don't want to overexpose yourself. You also don't want to tie up too much of your liquidity in inventory stock. That could be liquidity you might need to pivot in a different way. As an interim solution to take advantage of the 30-day grace period, 100% makes sense to look at it. If you're usually used to keeping a 1-month safety stock, might want to start keeping 6-month safety stock just for this one-time opportunity. Again, I cannot emphasize enough that I think this is temporary. I think this is going to continue, and this might be just the way of things in the future. So it's going to be good to monitor your tariff risk.
I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to just open it up to the floor. If anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask any questions or provide any feedback or maybe some context of how this may affect their business, happy to discuss with Jen's expertise. I just had a quick thought, was if you are looking at your actual costs of goods sold and you're looking at things like tariff, exchange rates, etc., what other things should a business owner strategically be looking at in that consideration of understanding their actual costs of goods sold and what could impact that?
Generally speaking, most of the costs for supply chain are driven by transportation costs. It's always a good idea to position your stock as close to your customers as possible. If you're doing e-commerce, it's a little more tricky. You're definitely going to be using, Canada Post and other couriers to get your stuff to your consumers. But don't always think formally. Like I'm always telling my smaller businesses that you can accomplish pretty big things that our supply chain, good supply chain scaling without getting incredibly formal. Depending on the kind of product you're selling, if it's not regulated, do you have to house it in a formal commercial warehouse? Do you have a business relationship with someone down in the United States that might be willing to share some space with you? Definitely still dot your I's and cross your T's. Make sure that it can be covered with insurance. Make sure that you're not violating any of your current contracts by doing so. But that could be an opportunity for you to position some products down south. I know a lot of my very small companies that are entrepreneur based and are just starting up. They've got, the friends and family distribution network in the United States. It could be a good way to quickly position some stock to take advantage of this grace period. Another thing that comes to mind is if you have contracts in place with your suppliers, you can actually add language that indicates that they have to let you know when they change their suppliers, or let you know if they change the supplier in a way that affects country of origin. You don't want to go through all the bother of calling all your suppliers and finding out what the country of origin is, only for it to change the next month and you have no idea. So you can put language like that into your contracts to make it a requirement that they notify you so that you can update your own records.
All right, I'm going to open the floor back up. What other questions or thoughts does our audience have regarding tariffs, or what are they thinking about how it may impact their business? Maybe we can get some guidance out of Jen on specific for your business. Might as well pick her brain while we have her here. Another side on my side, just a thought, is how do you forecast for these tariffs and the financial impact and the financial impact that this is going to have in 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, strategically longer, if this is going to actually stick around?
Well, we always talk about actual versus standard cost of goods. There's like, your assumption versus what happens. It's always nice to have a positive variance in the correct direction versus negative variance. It's always nice to like plan for things to be more expensive and be pleasantly surprised when they're not. I would recommend you factor in this tariff. I recommend you factor in this tariff, and if not this one, a 10% tariff in other locations, and just see what that impact looks like for your markets. I think tariffs are not going to be as uncommon as they have in the past, unfortunately. It's just the nature of where we are at in the global marketplace. We as North Americans, Canada and US, we still bring a lot from China. There's a lot of stuff that's coming in from China into Canada and the United States that would still be impacted if that tariff stays in place. I'm thinking of like botanical supplies and specifically because I can see the squalene teams on here. If a lot of those bulk supplies are coming into the United States and they're being brought in and repackaged into smaller volumes and distributed to companies that use products like that, that's still going to be impacted by a tariff of China. I would say that it's unlikely that that tariff is coming off anytime soon. Unless lobbyists get to work and indicate that the pain points are too painful for Americans, I doubt that's going to change. So even though that's coming into the United States, they're being repackaged into smaller volumes and then sold possibly to US and Canadian businesses, it's still going to get impacted by tariffs. I think, unfortunately, the United States is probably going to use tariffs as leverage in the future.
I have two questions.
Yes, please speak up. We can hear you a little bit.
I woke up sick. I don't have much of a voice, so I'll try to yell. My first question is, and maybe this is something where we have to look it up and give a quick answer, but that's substantially altered. If someone is bringing in products, say from China, they're paying a tariff, from China to the States, they're paying that 10% tariff. They substantially altered enough by repackaging it or changing it, however.
Repackaging wouldn't be sufficient though.
Okay.
Even different kinds of dilution isn't sufficient enough.
Okay, well, for whatever, they're adding value sufficiently that it's now considered the country of origin is the States, does that mean that some products are going to basically get double tariffed by the time they get imported to Canada because you're paying tariffs on the raw goods and then you're paying tariffs on the final product?
Yes, it could. It could. There's definitely like, you bring in a botanical, maybe it's a blend of different botanical oils. They blend them all together. It makes it now a product of the United States that gets sold to a Canadian company who's now paying an increased price for that component. Then they in turn turn it into a brand new product of a different sort. They're selling that to the United States. It gets tariff again.
Goody. Uh, so I guess then my second question is, because I'm sure we've all seen the millions of posts that are like, don't buy Heinz, don't buy this brand.
Oh, yes.
Kind of at war of, and I think what it comes down to is consumers are trying to mitigate the impact of tariffs on themselves. And
Yes.
obviously, like everyone here is passionate about supporting local businesses whenever possible and supporting the local economy. But from consumers and also just business owners with general expenses, how do we mitigate our everyday expenses? Because sometimes, buying local does cost more, and there's still a benefit to supporting. But like, what other than buying things that are made locally, how can we mitigate the impact of tariffs on our own expenses?
Good question. I've seen a lot of those posts lately, especially heated around ketchup. Um, I guess it depends on what your goal is. Is your goal to mitigate your costs, or is your goal like a sense of like patriotism and wanting to support Canadian businesses? I think if it's mitigating cost, that's going to be difficult because Canadian companies, even if they make it in Canada, their supply chains are going to be affected by this. I would imagine most suppliers are already building this 25% in, expecting that this is temporary. So those prices are already going up and they rarely go back down. So even the components you're buying could be tariffed or impact by tariffs elsewhere in the supply chain. That's going to increase your cost of goods. I imagine there's going to be like a lot of like supplier level hoarding, people putting in blanket purchase orders and stuff, trying to secure the stock that they need from the countries of origin that aren't being impacted. That can create supply disruption and increase costs in other ways. So I don't think there's going to be an easy way to avoid increased costs in this scenario. If the target then is to support Canadian businesses, there's a couple of methods you can do. I mean, if you look at the label on a product, it's not going to really tell you where it came from, unless it's like particularly proud of it and wants to toot it on the label. A lot of like companies like Safeway and Loblaws, they do private label branding. When you turn the label over, it's going to be like distributed, made for, Safeway Canada, or distributed for Loblaws out of San Diego, California. They're trying to blind this source because they don't want you to know what the source is, because that's a competitive market advantage, that source. They don't want that to get out. So it can be really difficult for a consumer to find the actual country of origin. If you're trying to support Canadian businesses, one thing to consider is that, maybe Heinz or French's ketchup are on both sides of the border. Just remember that they're fiscally registered in Canada. It's still a Canadian fiscal entity paying Canadian taxes with Canadian operations that buy Canadian goods and employ Canadian people. So, like, is that Canadian enough for people who are trying to support Canadian businesses? Or go more local, buy local for people that are like, that they're here in Canada. A perfect example, Silver Hills Bakery, also home in the Carbonaut line that's in Costco. They're here in Abbotsford. They've always been in Abbotsford. Perhaps that's more to someone's liking when they consider buy local. It can get really complicated when you get to the larger companies like Heinz and French's.
Anyone else have any other questions or comments to add? Just looking in the chat, I don't see any new ones posted, but everyone's still on the call. So what's going on in your minds? What do you want to ask, Jen?
I'm just looking at this one person. It's the only other person brave enough to be on camera, Doug Williamson.
Hello, Doug.
Hello, how are you?
Good, and how are you?
Great, great. Yeah, no, I really don't, at the minute we end the call, I'll think of a few questions, but right now I don't have any. I've worked in some importing specifically between Canada and the US and also China. So I've got a bit of understanding, but yeah, this is great. It's been very useful. Thank you.
Good. Well, if you have any of those follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, perfect.
And that goes for everybody. Like Murphy's Law, you're gonna like walk away from this webinar, you'll be brushing your teeth tomorrow morning and you're gonna think of something. Don't be afraid to reach out and pop us an email. Like I've been doing this a long time. It's no burden.
And realistically, it's one thing to kind of think about it now, especially now that we have 30 days and time to plan for it. But we're probably going to see new issues arise and new questions arise when the tariffs are implemented, especially because, like you said, that the United States has not released any information. Nobody's
not
going to
helping.
know what the rules are or what the processes are or how to work around it. So there's definitely going to be things that come up at the time of doing it as well, like when it comes to implement it.
I expect there to be some ambiguity too, like even if the tariff does go ahead in 30 days. I have seen situations like this where like a new tariff goes into play or there's been some change where it's not implemented universally at every border crossing and at every port of entry because customs officers themselves are doing their best to implement something that's shiny and new and it might require some clarification in places. So it's really up until again, using past precedents, I don't think they're going to clarify anything until the tariff goes ahead. We spent a good couple of hours yesterday evening doing another really heavy scour on all possible publications or references to these tariffs. And the closest we got was Canadian originating, Mexican originating, or one much more clarifying one that made us think it was going to be country of origin was, as of February 4th, the U.S. tariffs and Canada tariffs will apply to all USMCA qualifying goods. Well, that was the free trade agreement that Trump instigated just a few years ago. So that again makes me think country of origin, Canada, US, Mexico. So I don't know if we're going to get anything clearer than that until maybe days after the actual tariff proceeds.
And I guess one other question I have is how do we know if and what items are exempt? Because I know you mentioned that right now medical devices are not exempt, but they might be a candidate for becoming exempt. I was talking to someone the other day, and he said, this won't affect me. All my products are exempt and all my supplies are exempt. And I personally felt a little bit skeptical, but he seemed pretty confident. So is there a way to get that information?
So that's a good question. The Canadian tariff has specific items that it's being applied to. Perfect example is like almost everything in Chapter 33 of the Harmonized Tariff Code has been impacted by that one. So it's not so much that they're granting exceptions as they're being very particular about what they're applying it to. They already made the first announcement of what it applies to, and those publications are available very easily online everywhere because Canada is actually being clear. And in 21 days, there's going to be another announcement. I guess that's now 20 days, which will be the second wave of tariffs that they plan to implement this on. Not a single U.S. Customs Border Agency website or U.S. tariff site has any bulletins out right now indicating what it's not on. The only thing we have is it's 25% on Canadian-made goods or Canadian originating goods and 10% for energy exports to the United States from Canada. They have not gotten any clearer than that. It's entirely possible there will be exceptions. I would be shocked if the lobbyists and even journalists, as far as squeaky wheels, don't get to work right away on what the impacts would look like, and some exemptions roll out, like automakers, huge impact. Medical devices, huge impact. Like I can't imagine those exceptions wouldn't come down the line soon after a tariff being implemented. Again, especially the automakers. Those supply chains are so integrated on both sides of the border. They literally start a manufacturing process on one side, send it to a plant on the other side, and it can go back and forth several times. Like I can't imagine how they're not going to create some sort of exemption for that without shutting down those plants.
So I know when we were speaking yesterday, you said that there's kind of different agencies that the money from the tariffs ends up going to. It's not just the government, but is there like, if 25% of all goods crossing the border are now being, collected money on, is that going to impact, where's that money going? Is it going to help with social services? Is it going to help with government debt? Is it just going to
I have no idea what they're going to do with that money. It's definitely going to go into government coffers. It could go anywhere. I mean, it's government revenue, right? So it could go anywhere. I don't think they're going to be making any commitments that it goes towards social good.
They're not going to build new hospitals or schools or anything.
No. I mean, they might say those things to make us feel better, but I doubt that's actually happening.
Just noting, we've got a request to send out a recording to this webinar as well to everybody who registered. So just confirm that we will send that out to everybody.
I just noticed that DC Power Solutions is in the room, and there was a piece of information last night that I read that I thought you would find interesting, actually. This tariff that the United States has proposed also eliminates the small cap exemption, which was used, like anytime you brought anything into the United States that was under $800 each, you would get an exemption on duties, taxes, and tariffs. And the tariff specifically got language that eliminates that. So the tariff will apply to everything all the way down to like a $20 widget. So for companies that are bringing things in and doing customs clearance under $800, this tariff will apply.
That would go into that financial planning component if you're looking at what you're bringing in, et cetera, and planning out accordingly.
Yeah.
Jennifer, if I had a client or two that wanted to reach out to you directly, I could just contact you directly and do you charge like a consulting, or do you give your initial consultation for free?
For that, I will refer to Celine that is on the call.
I mean, we are always happy to meet with businesses to talk them through, kind of what their needs are, what their questions are. If they are looking, if they want to book a consultation because they're trying to explore our services and what that looks like, and working with us, then that's always a free consultation. If they're looking for a strategy session, an information session, or a consulting session, then that's at our hourly rate. So
Okay.
It depends on what they're looking for.
I think they'd be looking for a consultation on tariffs.
Yeah, we're happy to do kind of like a tariff strategy session and look at their unique business and their unique needs and help them put together that plan.
Yeah.
Okay. I might do that. Thank
I
you.
should also mention that there's probably some risk in the supply chain of disruption. There are some companies out there that simply will not be able to continue with even a planned purchase order if they feel it's going to be impacted by this tariff. They just can't do the 25% because the money's not in bank. What are they going to do without that component? That could definitely impact their supply and demand. So I would also recommend increasing safety stocks and lead times. Let's assume that everybody's factoring this tariff in, and it could mean 1 to 3 months delay, entirely possible.
Because basically what you're saying is that it's going to be like COVID toilet paper all over again. People are going to start stockpiling, and there's
Gosh, I hope it's not that bad. That was ridiculous.
I mean, if everyone is stocking 6 months worth of supplies when they'd normally buy one, there's just naturally going to be a lot of shortages, which is also going to drive up costs.
I don't think it's so much shortages. We have other countries we can import from. It's just a matter, it's going to take a little time to research them, set up those relationships. That's why I think it's only going to be 1 to 3 months. Whereas with COVID, the entire planet was impacted for their exports and imports. So it was a bit more wide scale. The other thing too is like COVID, we had a whole batch of new variables appear. Like Amazon started in its infinite glory, consigning entire ships, which took them out of circulation for everybody else to use. And then ships also were like, these ports of call are so congested, I'm just going to skip it. I'm going to skip it. I'm going to unload the container at the next port instead and throw these containers on truck to go back. Like you couldn't even keep up with the number of new variables that were coming out of the large corporations getting creative. Whereas like things have settled down a little bit. We still have those new variables to contend with, but I don't expect something that is isolated between Canada, the United States, Mexico, and China to be the kind of scale of disruption that the global pandemic was.
We have another question in the chat from the Langley Chamber of Commerce. They're asking, do we have any comments on tactics businesses should be considering, like preloading the inventory? We talked about that a little bit. What would be the financial impact, do you think, of trying to do that versus restock in future with the tariffs and potential price increases, et cetera, later on?
Well, you're definitely tying up your cash. It makes you less flexible to pivot to other variables like the tariffs getting increased or more counter tariffs or more people joining our little trade battle. That would be my biggest concern. I know times are tight for most businesses. You know, we've had very high interest rates for some time that have only recently come down, which have really constrained our ability to get, you know, economical loans that have helped us with our capital investments. I'd be very concerned that people might over leverage themselves by buying too much more inventory and placing it in the United States. You know, got to make payroll. The other thing is like it's not free to locate that stuff down in the United States. You know, you're dealing with carrying costs, you know, the cost of the warehouse, shipping and handling, monthly minimums, even if you put a small portion down there. That's why I'm like, maybe you want to get creative. You have friends down in the United States that own a company that might have space. But again, make sure you can get insurance, make sure it's good, safe place. You don't want to lose that inventory. You got to protect it. So you just want to keep those financial constraints in mind for sure. I can't imagine that they're gonna do something retroactive. That would be pretty unprecedented to be like, we have records that you brought this stock in 20 days ago, and now that we've decided that we don't like Canada again, we're gonna send you a bill. I don't even think that's possible, but these are unprecedented times.
Also, I just wanted to send a quick note to anyone who may have asked a question that we haven't answered. I noticed on my Zoom chat, it was defaulting to sending a direct message to read.ai meeting notes instead of everyone. So if for some reason you typed a question in chat and it wasn't answered, just double check where it got sent and make sure you resend it to everyone.
Oh, good point. I didn't actually realize that could happen. So good point. Thank you. I think we've hit all the ones that have been addressed to everyone, but I am keeping my eye on the chat. All right. Jen, are there any kind of final thoughts or other topics that come to mind based on some of the comments or feedback so far from the audience today?
Just the one that I cannot emphasize enough to treat this as a grace period. Even if we decide in 30 days that these are not going into place, to do your due diligence on what your country of origin is and understanding how country of origin is determined even for the products you're making is extremely important. As a business, you really need to know what your exposure is on both sides of your supply chain for duties and taxes and any changes that hit those things. Things that you're going to want to look into is it's officially known as the country of origin determination for marking of goods. And the other resource that you want to pay attention to, of course, is your harmonized tariff schedule. That is the classification number that you would use for identifying your product. When you look at that and you find the one that matches your product, you may actually want to call a broker company and have a customs ruling done or a customs verification done that is the correct code that they would use during customs clearance. That code right beside it tells you what your duty is, tells you if there's any tariff, what countries it applies to. There could be other tariffs involved that you don't even realize are in place, that you're paying a higher duty rate for that stuff coming from those countries. And you're like, whoa, now that I know that this country actually has a higher duty rate than the others, I got to find a source that's coming from somewhere else. Those tariffs and higher duties might already be in play and you don't even realize it. That harmonized tariff system, it's gold. You want to be looking at that. It's so easy to find online. There's a slightly different version for each country, but it's pretty universal. It's word searchable. It's a great resource.
Those are all really great points, Jen. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to open the floor. One final chance. Any questions or thoughts to share with Jen? If not, we'll wrap up and get everyone a few minutes back in their day. Just scanning over the chat. I don't see anything new coming through, but I did post our Discovery Consult booking link as well in the chat. So if you would like to continue the discussion with CHOPS Consulting, please feel free to reach out, book a consult. We're happy to meet with anyone to discuss any potential opportunities to support you in this change, and potentially connect you with Jen if you need to come up with a strategy on how to refocus in the next 30 days. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We'll be sending out a recording to this in the near future. Hang tight. Thanks, Jen, for joining.